So good morning, everybody. Really loved all of that energy, so hopefully we can keep it up. I'm already a dilemma. My head sweats when I talk, and I have like no hands to get my handkerchief out, so just work with me as we go through this process. Again, lifelong Louisvillian. When I got this topic, I started thinking about what does that mean, right? Started thinking about separate but equal. Does that really matter? Do we want to be separate but equal? Did it work for us in the past? How does that play out? But then I also started thinking about the word symmetry and what it means for me, right? So when you think about symmetry, I started thinking about equity, started thinking about justice, right? And then when I think about Louisville, my hometown, that I have a lot of experience with, do we want the West End to be like the East End? Or do we just want to have equity and justice around the access to resources, access to opportunities? Because this is what we love about Louisville is the diversity of the neighborhoods, right? But what we actually want to think about is how we all utilize all of those neighborhoods and how we play a role. So as I was getting ready, so shout out to Ben for calling me on February the 1st to ask me to do this thing on February the 15th. Which that's how this works, which is cool. But good friends call, so you do what they ask you to do, right? So I was talking to a good friend of mine, and we were talking about this tale of two cities. And remember the Louisville magazine started talking about the West End. The first article they did was around stop ignoring the West End, right? And it was like this altering thing that the Louisville magazine was now talking about a part of Louisville that it had not talked about before, which was the West End. And when you look at the numbers, you see that this is two separate cities. Just based on the income, there's a $38,000 difference on the annual income. Who has access to cars? There's a difference. Right, these are all numbers we know, we talk about, right? But what are we doing differently to make that not the norm? What are you doing every day in your day-to-day to make this different, right? So when we have these conversations around symmetry, around justice and equity, a lot of times that means we've got to start thinking about what am I willing to give up so that we can have this real city that we all thrive and want to have. So numbers, data, reports, all of that stuff has been coming out. But I want to talk about it from my perspective as a young black boy growing up in Louisville, right? So born in 1969. I just had a 50th birthday in January, you all, so. I was born in the Shawnee neighborhood. I was raised there by my mom, 3 siblings. This was our home, 44th and Parker. So from 1969 to 1981, West Louisville was all I knew. Shawnee, Portland, Chickasaw, Russell, Beecher Terrace, all of these places is what I knew. Southwick, Cotter Homes, which is now Park Duval, Parkland, right? But it was a beautiful place. Grew up, grandmother around the corner, auntie around the corner, my mom's best friend who was my aunt. I don't know if you all know, but we adopt folks who are not our aunts and uncles, and they become that for life. So 44th and Parker. Wintertime, I spend a lot of time in the Shawnee golf course, up and down those hills, sledding with everybody else. Summertime, I spend a lot of time in Shawnee Park, Chickasaw Park, around the Parkway, Northwestern Parkway. Fall, I spend a lot of time at the Shawnee, now in the Academy of Shawnee, playing Little League football. Thought I was going to be the next Earl Campbell. As you see, that did not work out. But 44th and Parker is still my home. Anybody that rides with me in the West End always go by the house that I grew up in, right? So if you're in my car and we're in Shawnee, you're going to see where I grew up because that's what I love. So for me, the West End has always been this special place because we had Miss Scott's candy store where I can go buy penny candy, 5-cent pickles. She was always open. Winn-Dixie that was on Amy and Market. So we had all of these places. I used to go to the drive-in at the Big A shopping mall, There was a bowling alley there. There was the skating rink on Broadway. I went to the movies on 4th Street. Right? So my world was perfect to me. Right? So when people talk about the West End, I don't know the West End that I hear you all talking about at times, because that's not how it looks to me. That's not what it is to me. This is home to me. It's got a smell, it's got a feel. Went to Portland Elementary, Western Middle School, and we had to walk those days, right? There was no buses taking me to school. There was this ice storm one winter. Well, in Louisville, it could be the summer. There was this ice storm one winter that was almost like we ice skated all the way to school, and it was closed when we got there. But our parents had to go to work, so they said, go to work, you go to school, so that's what you did. But it was a group of us. And also during this time, you got to remember, went to school in Portland Elementary and Western Middle School that are in the heart of Portland. That was not a place for young black kids to be. Grown men used to chase us out because they didn't want us in their neighborhood. This was also the time my older sister, during busing in '75, got bussed out to PRP, right? And I remember going to pick her up once, and the Klan marching out there because they didn't want people like my sister at their school. So when we talk about symmetry in Louisville, remember equity and justice, access to resources, right? And how we got to figure out how we fight against this so that we can move to a better place and to a city that we love. So most of my childhood was spent down in Shawnee, 44th and Parker. By the time we got into the 7th grade, Mom had remarried, working well, new husband's working well. They decided they want to move out. We had no say, so we had to pack up and move out. So we moved in 1981 all the way out to Westport Road and Chamberlain Lane. I don't know if you all as a kid had ever taken, that felt like I was going out of the city, like I was going to a new state. I did not know that was part of Louisville, right? So when we get in the car, she wants to show us this house. We roll up. It's a big difference from the house on 44th and Parker. But we moved to a place where, you all know Chamberlain Lane, the Walmart on Chamberlain Lane. Back in '81, it was a big farm. So when I went to get on my school bus, I went from an urban community to watching cows across the street. Like, this is culture shock. And it's also a place where I went from surrounded by a lot of people who I knew and loved to almost social isolation, right? So we move and we go to this place that Mom believes is better for us, going to help us get better opportunities and a better future. Because again, resources are in the East that are not in the West. So there's this conversation that we got to continue to have. The schools that I went to in the West End did not have the same thing that the schools in the East End had. How do we still live like that today and think that's okay? Right? So went from predominantly black friends, mostly, to going into a neighborhood for black families. Right? So that first year, bless my mom, she allowed all of us to stay in the schools that we were in, because we kind of like, we don't want to go to a new school. We don't know anybody. So she would get up every morning around 5, put all of us in the car, take us to our grandmother's house, and then she would go to work. And then we would go to school from there, right? So we finished up at Western Middle School, then I had to transfer to Cameron. Has anybody been in Western Middle School? Has anybody been in Cameron? Those who have been in Western Middle School and in Cameron, do you know the difference? Right? It's a huge difference. And this is not the new Western Middle School. Western's changed. And the kids who used to go to Western don't get to go to Western no more, because now it's a magnet school, right? So again, remember symmetry, justice, and equity. We're not working on the same page. So Westport Road and Chamberlain Lane, which is totally different now. And I went to 94 because that's how long we stayed out there before I ended up deciding to go away to school. But the difference between the East End and the West End, for me, the West End was home. The West End was comfort. The West End was where I knew I belonged. The East End was not that, right? So I'm not asking that they be the same. I'm really asking that we think about how we provide the resources that they both need so our kids and families can thrive. So this is not about saying we want everything that the East End has to come to the West End, but we do want, this is me, I want Big A back. I want to be able to go watch a drive-in movie in the West End. I want to be able to go bowling in the West End, right? I want to go roller skating, which I'm not great at, but I want to go in the West End. I want to be able to go to a grocery store and choose which one I want to go to in the West End, because where I live now, there's 2 Krogers in a mile from each other. There's a Walmart, there's a Myers, there's a Aldi's. I have options. Families in the West End don't have options. And when they do have options, those options are breaking their pockets because it's at the little corner stores who upcharge a 99-cent gallon of milk to $5 because they know they can't, right? And the other picture that I showed you all, my other older sister I cropped her out because the picture didn't work for me. But we both celebrate birthdays in January, and she's in this picture, so I did give her some props. So since I was born, she had to share her birthday with me, right? So we're both in January. She's I'm the 23rd, and Mom only does one. So we've celebrated for that since I've been around for the last 50 years, which has become a family tradition. That's my experience as a young black boy growing up in Louisville. I've raised 3 young black men in Louisville, and for me, Louisville, there's not a place in Louisville that they can't go, and I was real clear about that, because this is our city. I want you to experience every piece of this city because it's a great city that has issues that it needs to deal with, right? So we've been talking about it. Louisville Magazine, Greater Louisville Project, you got Josh Poe's redlining map, you got the State of Louisville Urban League, you got the folks at the Center for Health Equity. The conversations are happening around the inequities that creates the lack of symmetry in this city. We know all the data. We've known the data for years. We knew what schools were not right, that we're not having kids graduate with what they need for a long time. The question is, what are we going to do about that to make that different? When you decide where your kid's going to school, are you also advocating for other schools to be better, or am I just concerned about my kid? My 2 older boys went to Mesquite. One was an advanced kid, got into magnet programs. One was a neighborhood kid because we lived in Old Louisville. And you talk about symmetry, there's lack of symmetry even in a school building around how our kids are getting educated and what they have access to. So when my boys were at Mesquite, I served on the site-based decision-making team, right? So we had this young girl who was in the 8th grade, ready to graduate from middle school, and she heard from somewhere that they had foreign language classes. She said, nobody ever told me that I could take a foreign language class in all 3 years of my time here in this middle school. One of the parents who was serving with me on the site-based decision-making team, and I hope she's never in the room when I tell this story one day, but maybe I do hope she's in the room. But she said to the room, what did the young girl do to earn it? Like her child did something different to earn a class, a foreign language class, that could have probably changed this young girl's life if she had the opportunity to take it. So symmetry is not just about what's happening in the West and the East or the South. It's about what's happening in our institutions that we send our kids to on a daily, right? I say consistently, and I don't know if they'll ever do it, but if the PTA ever decided to take all of its money, and not just for each school, and put it into one coffer and say, we're gonna divvy this money out based on need, not based on what the parents can raise, because Ballard will always outraise Shawnee. Mel will always outraise Central. But if we're talking about symmetry and we're talking about equity and justice, we've got to do things differently and not just do it because it's always been done this way. So the numbers are here. A lot of people are talking about this issue. A lot of people are holding people accountable. A lot of people are asking us to be different. But what I'm always asking is what as individuals can do, right? We need systems change, but systems don't change until individuals change. Right? There's folks in this room right now who run systems and run organizations that can go in tomorrow and radically change the way they do business that would change the outcomes for people's lives. Right? If you run an HR department and you go look and see who's in your employee base and you know it's not right, you can say to your team, we need to recruit differently. Right? I need you all showing up at places where you don't show up at right now. Because who we have is who we've always have, and this don't work for us no more. If you teach, if you're in a school, you know who gets suspended on a daily. You know their behaviors are no different than anybody else's. Where are you standing up for kids at? And when do you say, no, this is not a reason to suspend a kid because this kid needs to be here so he can learn. Let's think about how we do things differently. So, a couple of things that are working, that are in the process that we hope is going to work, that we know is going to work. I see you, Dr. Jolly. That we know is going to work. And it's all about being intentional and about talking about what you need to talk about. So you all know Louisville Urban League. You all know they're in the process of raising $35 million to build a sports and educational complex on 30th and Ali in the Russell neighborhood. I would ask who's donated, but I'm not. If you haven't donated to the track, please donate to the track. Because it's going to be altering, life-changing, not just for the kids who get to use it, but for the communities that it's going to be in. You know there's no hotel in the West End? You know it's hard to find a venue in the West End to hold an event like this? Why? And why don't we make that different? So, sports complex is coming up. I get to help co-lead a project called Russell, A Place of Promise. Russell, A Place of Promise is really looking at the next neighborhood that we believe is on the verge of being gentrified. Right? And we believe we can get ahead of that. And it's not saying people can't move in, people can't come in and have businesses. It's saying, how do we do this investment without displacement of the people who have held down Russell forever? How do we help them become the owners of what the city, their neighborhood looks like? How do we help them become the owners of the houses? There's only a 20% home ownership rate in Russell right now. We want to elevate that. We want Russell families to own those properties. Has anybody ever been through the Russell neighborhood? Beautiful, right? Beautiful houses, beautiful housing stock. We want families who have been there to buy those houses and live in those houses. We don't want other folks to come in and take up all of that property and then push them out. Right? We want to create black wealth in a black neighborhood for black families to do their thing. And that's not at the exclusion of anybody else. It's just saying these families have been here historically, Old Walnut Street, where black businesses was. Central High School has been holding it down forever, creating black excellence for 150 years. The Western Library, the first library to let black folks come in and check out books. The historical nature of Russell is about black folks, but it doesn't mean white folks and other folks can't come in. But how do black folks lead that conversation? So Russell, A Place of Promise is that. Co-leading with the city, with Teresa Zawacki, and a whole lot of great people helping us think about how we move this work. Got a grant from the Keenan Charitable Trust, $5 million to seed it. I tell folks all the time, it feels like I have 2 jobs now. This is making me feel like I'm an ED in 2 organizations, but it's still fun. But there's just so much opportunity, and that's just Russell. Think about Park Duval. Think about Parkland. Think about Shawnee. Think about Chickasaw. Think about what they're doing in Portland. These neighborhoods are thriving neighborhoods because the people there are thriving people who are looking for opportunities to make sure that they can build a future for them and their families. So that's all we're asking for, is when we talk about symmetry, you think about it in justice and equity, and you think about how do I individually help live out that vision, right? Last quick story I'll tell, and then I'm gonna wrap up. My wife had a surgery about 8 years ago. She was laid in the bed for a long time. So I decided that we were gonna go take a drive. Because one of the things I love to do when I've been gone from Louisville for a long time, on a Saturday morning, is just get in my car and drive. And I never get on the expressway. This is always about the street, because I like the nooks and crannies of our neighborhoods. So I was taking her on a drive. We came down Frankfort Avenue, Lexington, went through the park. So we went through Seneca, Cherokee. It's a beautiful sunny day. Those parks are packed. People playing, soccer, kickball, running, hiking, mountain biking, whatever they're doing. We do all of that. So we go down Bardstown Road. Bardstown Road is packed. People out drinking coffee, people at the shops. We keep driving. We hit Broadway. Things start changing. Broadway is not that lively. It's not that hype. We go down to Shawnee Park. Not much happening in Shawnee Park. I don't know if y'all remember, Shawnee Park got kind of shut down for a long time in the 80s and 90s because we thought that was a way to curb violence. So we stopped letting families hang out in the park because we thought it was unsafe for them, instead of trying to figure out what the real thing was and figure that out. So Shawnee Park had a long time trying to come back. So we drive through. We ride down to Chickasaw. Chickasaw is always kind of on point because old folks like to hold down Chickasaw because they play tennis. Got some of the best clay courts in the city, right? But just to see that difference, but how we utilize parks and how the city and how people take care of different parks, right? So when we talk about symmetry, it's so much deeper than just this 9th Street divide. It really is around how we live our day-to-day lives, right? So as you all continue to go through your day, think about how you're showing up. Think about how symmetry is showing up in your world. Think about how you are challenging yourself to be a little more uncomfortable. Think about what you're willing to give up so that everybody can have opportunities, right? Do you need all of this space that you have? Is your kid the only kid that needs to have the best outcomes? Right? Because when you advocate for your kid, you're actually advocating against my kid in most cases. Because what you're saying is, I want this for my kid, and these other kids who don't get it don't deserve it. Right? So check yourselves and all of that every day around how you're showing up, how you're creating symmetry, which is equity and justice, and how you're challenging your friends to be different in the world that we all want to live in and be a part of. So I just want to thank you all for coming out. That's my time, I believe in.